Good day, everyone. It took a while, but finally here, chapter 418. Now, I'm going to do something differently for this one. For this video, for this chapter specifically, because it is about my guy, and those who know me well enough, they know that Tserri Ednek, or Tserri Donihi, beyond Hoikoro, is my favorite character in all of Hunter, my favorite villain in the whole series. And they would also know about the 5 hour behemoth that I made analyzing him and talking about all sorts of things that are all centered around my favorite character. So because of this was a very special chapter, and therefore I'm putting in a bit more extra effort. So I apologize for how long this took, and I'll try to be as concise as possible without rambling. So right in front of me, I've created a whole bunch of slides, and it'll pretty much help me move from point to point to point without meandering along too much. So I have the basic gist of what I want to talk about quickly and efficiently as possible. Now, first, I'm going to talk about my quick thoughts. How did I feel about the chapter? And what was the overall consensus? We all had a chance to witness greatness that day. Greatness in its highest order. Was this the crescendo? Was this the zenith? Was this the apex? As I was reading that chapter and as I was going through its entirety, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, how would these guys do it? How would these guys, the naysayers, the Tserri blind witnesses, the haters who have been spewing false narratives for years, what will they say? What will they try? How will they undermine the greatness, the undisputed GOAT, the pound for pound Nen God? How will they do it? And of course, over these couple of days after the chapter's been out, I've seen multiple attempts, and of course, they're all bull jive. This chapter was so great that people I haven't even spoken to in months hit me up on Discord just to talk to me about this chapter, just to talk to me because they remembered in the back of their heads that Tserri is my guy. So clearly, I love the chapter. It's my favorite chapter of the batch. It most likely will be surpassed if I'm correct on what 419 and 420 will be centered about, which I will talk about which I will show the slides for that. Well, I'll show the images and the visuals right there and for the video, but I will discuss it. So first things first, yes, it's my favorite chapter, and currently my favorite chapter so far. I was very happy and pleased with it. It was just an excellent overall chapter, and everyone's starting to see the magnificence of my guy. But alright, now I'm going to talk about the other thing, the elephant in the room. Did this chapter diminish the greatness of Tserri Donihi beyond Hoikoro? No. It did not. In fact, it doesn't even change anything. All it did was just show that he's the GOAT. I'm sorry. Naysayers, blind witnesses, you've all failed once again. Now, they've always been building up these false narratives, talking about how, Tserri is arrogant, or he's stupid, or this weird Dunning-Kruger curve effect going on where he overrates his own, he overhypes himself, and in fact in actuality he's incompetent. Some nonsensical narratives and beliefs which are only manifested through very gross misreadings of the story and through lack of rereading of the story, and through and a lot of these are also molded by such immense disdain for this character, because for some reason, now this might be taken very wrong, but I just think it's very goofy, since these are fictional characters, that for some reason that this guy being a misogynist who explicitly targets and kills women, for like that for some reason he's hated. Yet we glaze characters like Frollo, who pretty much committed and incited the Kurta Holocaust, or Hisoka, who had like who's very perverted and extremely weird, especially around Gon and Kill. Well, you guys know the scene from Greed Island. Medium, who killed a child, killed two parents, beheaded them, and then he killed right in front of the child, and then he proceeded to kill the child. We've had more. It's just very silly to just simply hit on a character just because of this fact, but these characters who did all of these other things, they get passes. Of course, there's always going to be people who don't like Frollo. To me, it's just goofy to hate on any fictional villain at all. The only character who I've ever genuinely hated, and even then I've like reconciled with it, is Madame Polignac from Rose of Versailles, and that's just because of her actions towards Charlotte in episode 19. And I won't say anything beyond that for those who are interested in Rose of Versailles. It's a phenomenal series. But a lot of this hatred towards Tserri is blinding towards these people who aren't able to think objectively, which is a damn shame. So we have people who say he's not talented or that he's overhyped. No. And in fact, he's still the GOAT. He's still the highest level talent we've seen. And in fact, he's not overhyped. In fact, he's not overrated or overhyped. In fact, I'd say he's the most downplayed character in the entire series. Look at the subreddits, for example. And there is even sleuths of people on Twitter. And they usually like to slander my guy, spouting all sorts of nonsense and lies. But let's go over the feats one last time. Gon and Killua had their aura nodes opened by Wing. Of course, Gon broke the promise to not fight, and this essentially delayed training for about 2 months. And then once they learned Ten and Ren, they learned all of that sort of stuff. And then eventually they learned Gyo, and they would later develop their Hatsus and their abilities in Greed Island. Now let's talk about the GOAT. He instantly, without having his aura nodes forcefully opened, starts manipulating his aura around, changing its size and moving it from body part to other body parts. Gon was unable to do that even by Greed Island. My guy was able to do that instantly. In half the first day, this guy already got the hang of Gyo. Now, if you guys remember, to learn Gyo, that requires mastery of Ten and Ren. And this guy did this in half the first day. Mind you, the ship did not depart immediately in the very beginning of the day. That was until the afternoon. So already, the learning speed is on a different level. But the most damning piece of evidence is the learning speed for Gyo. My guy took half the first day, and this was on top of learning Ten and Ren, and he was casually doing this. It took Gon and Killua a whole night, and even afterwards, because this was to analyze the Hisoka Kastro match in order to see the bungee gums, and trying to learn how Kastro was defeated by Hisoka. Killua learned Gyo in a single night. Again, let's do the math here. A single night is, of course, more time than half a day. And it's not like he immediately started as soon as he got up from bed. Even then, when he was using his Gyo, he was struggling to maintain it. He was sweating. My guy was doing this casually in chapter 368. Case in point, he's the GOAT. Like, There's just no debating this. I don't need to talk about any other circumstances. I don't need to talk about any more other instances. That's all I need to say. Otherwise, this video would be way too long, and I don't want to yap too much. But okay, in terms of this chapter specifically, people are slandering, saying like, "Oh, this ability is trash." I'm like, huh? What sense does that make? So first off, people were calling this diet King Crimson. Here's the thing. JoJo's on a higher level of power scaling compared to the likes of Hunter, which is always going to be much more grounded. Therefore, of course, this was never going to be as broken as the real thing. Even Henrik's ability, which is basically Giorno's gold experience, is nowhere near on the level of broken as gold experience. Because with gold experience, he can turn anything into a living creature. Henrik is only limited to devices. And even then, he can't exactly spam the ability because it works with his aura as fuel. And eventually he's going to run out of aura and needs to recharge. With Tserri, we learned that. So, of course, like, they're saying, like, oh, it's limited because he can't even interact with people. He can't even take items if they're already holding an item. For example, if someone's holding a gun or a knife, he can't snatch it away from them. And he can't directly harm anybody through this. But, like, here's the thing. With this, you guys are the same people who would say that if he was able to actually do any of these things, you guys would say it's bad writing. Because then otherwise it would be way too broken and the net system is broken. Duh, of course. Therefore, his ability couldn't exactly be like King Crimson. And 3, the fact that we learned that he can't even harm people directly doesn't change anything, because this was always going to be the case. Here's the thing. In the series, you're fighting Nen users. You can't harm someone if you're in Zetsu. Because you're pretty much shutting off all aura in the body. The only way to harm a Nen user is if you have Nen at your disposal. So therefore, how a fight would always be with Tserri is that he would, for example, because people were saying that Guido could defeat Tserri, which is blasphemy at its highest order. In a hypothetical match with Guido would throw his tops, Tserri would enter Zetsu, close his eyes, or maybe he'd close Zetsu, he'd close his eyes and then go into Zetsu, see 10 seconds ahead in the future, walk around him. Guido's gonna think that he's attacking the real thing when in reality it's an illusion. Tserri steps right behind Guido, infuses his arm with his Ren, then punches Guido, who's completely exposed and undefended, because he doesn't have like any Ko or Rio to protect himself from unforeseen attacks, which is what was given to us all the way back in Great Island. That's how he fights, basically like King Crimson in the series, where he looks 10 seconds ahead in the future, goes behind you, and then goes for the kill shot. This is how he would fight. Therefore, how us learning about this ability doesn't really change anything. He's not suddenly on fraud watch. This ability isn't garbage. In fact, his ability is even more bust than I realized, because this is all just level 1. He's still, essentially, my thoughts on this ability haven't changed. They're effectively the same. I was only clarified on how he would fight. So I feel very, very vindicated about that. Now in this chapter, we got to see more of his phenomenal IQ. And I've been saying this for the longest time, but he's the smartest character in the entire series. This chapter proved it. And of course people are saying that he's being stupid, but they'll just say anything at this point. Combat IQ, the highest in the series as well. We saw these instances when he immediately figured out what Benjamin was going to do, him immediately going after the Mafia bossage, which we saw in chapter 417. So he was immediately spot on and correct. And then Seti using the information at his disposal to go to Route A. Seti, people also like to say that, oh, Seti's arrogant, oh, he's foolish. But that makes no sense, because if he really was this arrogant character, like a Ramon from Chimera Ant, then he would have just immediately taken his ability after chapter 387, was high on his power, or like a Haley character, and then immediately went out into the halls of Tier 1 and wanted the smoke. That's what real arrogance looks like. But it's such a, because people have this misbelief that said he's a narcissist, when in reality he's not a narcissist. Because narcissists are, because what he really is egotistical, but not a narcissist. Narcissistic are very different kinds of people who are actually very talentless. The difference between a narcissist is and someone that's egotistical is that a narcissist at their core is someone who deeply has no talent, no skill, and there's someone who's so insecure that they feign the that they feign they have these proclivities and these skills in order to basically keep up with conversations, or they feign knowledge on subjects that they don't really have any knowledge of. They're effectively posers. That's what they really are. Now, when you look at Seti and you see all of these scenes with him in the story, he's not a poser. He's egotistical, but that's about it. But as someone, you think that someone egotistical truly be his own biggest critic? Because he's the one who's constantly acknowledging that his ability isn't perfect and that there are always things to work on. He's always constantly striving for improvement. That's the complete opposite of someone that's egotistic, a narcissist would do. Because a narcissist would just think they're absolutely perfect and that they don't need to work on any flaws, or that they lack any flaws whatsoever, that they don't need to hit the lab. Seti's the complete opposite. But the haters will never be able to reconcile this, and that's why I'll continue on winning, because you guys are constantly having eggs thrown at your face because of your complete blinded hatred for this character. But anyway, now I'm talking about the funeral scene. And when I saw this scene, this reminded me immediately of Yu Yu Hakusho Chapter 1, where Yusuke was dead, and he was pretty much able to see what people thought of him in his wake. And of course, like, him trying to take out Vantine was very similar to how Yusuke wanted to he wanted to smoke with the teachers, who were pretty much ridiculing him and like smearing his honor. And this also ties to he essentially really feels like an MC. Like every villain is a like, you know the saying, a villain is the protagonist of their own journey. And this goes into this second thing I want to talk about, which is the No Longer Human. Now, No Longer Human is a book written by Osamu Tezuka, or yeah, I believe so. And this ties into chapter 417, Seti's ability, and chapter 385. Now, in chapter 385, the Nen Beast speaks to Theta and tells her that if she lies ever again to the prince's next question, she will no longer be human. Now, for those who don't know what No Longer Human is about, I'm going to explain it. And I'll keep it very brief. It's effectively about a person who, a young man named Yozo Oba, detailing and chronicling his life. And throughout his life, he practically puts on these masks and pretty much acts fictitiously around others, but in order to satisfy them. So as a result, he never ends up truly being himself, and never ends up truly being satisfied. The story deals with the existential crisis and how and over the course of his life, he he never truly becomes himself and gets lost in these roles, these characters that he's playing. And as a result, he ends up becoming disassociated, um, disillusioned, and completely disenfranchised and broken, to the point where he never really formed any genuine connections and bonds. And it's a very tragic story. But that's effectively what kind of character, what kind of man Tserri is, considering this is an ability. It's a very lonely ability that effectively ostracizes him from the world around him, where he's the only one in this sort of reality, and no one can really interact with him. He's completely detached himself, but he's actually able to know what people would think of him. Of course, this is tied with that chapter, that dialogue in 385. It then comes back in 417, where Benjamin said that Tserri himself he doesn't even regard Tserri as human. And then I'll go to the Tserri Theta stuff. So first off, did she see Tserri? No, I don't believe so. Because she she didn't even react when she walked past him. Anybody would have reacted differently if they saw a guy completely wearing a different getup. Now as for what happened to her scar, well, one, there's two things. Tserri's in Zetsu, so he would be unable to see it. But here's the thing. Because of the previous chapters that we learned, Tserri was able to... This is before Tserri was even able to develop this ability. Theta had already been scarred at the very end of chapter 368. And then in chapter 376, we see her wearing the bandage. That's the very same chapter where Tserri also used the water divination. But he didn't really react any differently. He didn't wonder what really happened. He didn't inquire about it. He just carried on as is normally. So we always just believed that he was just very that he was completely detached and cold and didn't really care. He was just ruthless. But with the knowledge of the previous few chapters, we pretty much learned that the reason why he didn't react was simply because he was incapable of seeing it, because it's a scar created by his Nen beast, and these princes are unable to see the effects of these Nen beasts or what they can do. The only exception is Fugetsu's Nen beast, and Kacho's, and Zhongli's. But that's just because they quite literally create physical material. So with this, and people would say, oh, well, he's unable to use it because he doesn't have Gyo. Here's the thing. This is before he developed the ability. So by 376, he already had Gyo because he had mastered it by chapter 368. 376 was way before he developed this ability. So he would have been able to use Gyo and seen the scar in that case. But because he had Gyo, didn't react to the scar, then that means he's simply incapable of seeing it. Now, the real question is, what happened to her bandage? Because the last time we saw the bandage was the last time we saw Theta was in chapter 386, and she was wearing the bandage. Now, my theory is two things. Either one, the scar is receded, and so she took off the bandage, or two, which is I think the most plausible theory, is that Togashi forgot to draw the bandage again, like he did back in 2018 with the 384, 385, 386, 387 stretch. If any of you guys remember that far back, which was then fixed in the volume release in 2022. But that page was phenomenal, where Theta was essentially had this look of melancholy. Now, of course, there's multiple different ways to interpret it. The look of sadness, basically her realizing that she failed to kill him, but at the same time, it's she's also worried about him. She's worried that he might sink even deeper into the darkness, that he might become even more of a monster. Fear for him, fear about him, that he might throw himself into even more danger, and quite a bunch of other different interpretations for it, and all of them work. Like not one of them are reaches. Of course, the thing with Seti's character is that he's so disassociated and so um, disillusioned and cut off that he's unable to grasp this level of like any form of empathy or care that people have towards him, and that's the tragedy of it. Now, I'm the if you guys have well known, I'm someone who made the Messiah's thesis video, and I've always repeatedly called Seti the chosen one. Now, to quickly summarize why I call him the chosen one, it's because of for my interpretation of Seti's character is that he was someone that was born with the most prestigious amount of talent, with the most prodigious amount of talent, and he was born with the liberty to achieve good, unlike Medium. And this is because he was blessed by destiny or by a higher entity like a god, for example, to be able to achieve all of these things in order to change Kakin for the better and also change the world in a positive way or reconstruct it in his own image. And in chapter 348, Seti thanks God, just like how Jesus would thank God for his many blessings when he was basically given this miracle and this change to change the world. And of course, he was, despite being born in the visage of purity and the embodiment of the human spirit, Seti bathes in sin and embodies Satan, desiring to instead usher chaos and darkness. However, in chapter 385 and 387, Seti experiences this thing what I call the free of avidya, which means to be free from ignorance, or essentially liberated from ignorance, illusion, or delusion. And this is completely manifested in the symbolism of his ability, where quite literally he closes his eyes to see the truth, or to become spiritually aware. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail. I'll just show the images. But effectively, after he was essentially freed from ignorance, which is also set up all the way back in, which ties to a piece of dialogue in 348, about how overreaching vanity is the greatest sin of all. Yeah, not realizing one's own ignorance is the greatest sin of all. And in chapter 368, Seti talks about how what I hate the most is a lying wench. Can I trust you? This is completely juxtaposed in chapter 386, where he says, I've been surprised at my own change of heart. A two-faced woman can be pretty cute. This is after that chapter, after him achieving this pseudo enlightenment, where he was effectively freed from avidya and is achieving this higher plane of existence. Seti has started to adopt different philosophies and beliefs that would have otherwise ran contradictory to who he was prior to the ship. In chapter 404, he has this piece of dialogue where he says, "Who was it that said, leveling up isn't a climbing a hill but a staircase? It's so true. My time just wouldn't get shorter, and I was about to be discouraged." Now, Seti, prior to the events of 385 would have never acknowledged this, because it would have ran contradictory to just who he is. Because he would have believed that this sort of philosophy was just hogwash, because he generally thought he was that guy. So, after his enlightenment, he's open to these other different philosophies and beliefs that he otherwise would have just completely brushed off and disregarded, because he thought it was never applicable to him. And this symbolism continues. This journey continues of him being the chosen one, where quite literally in two times in this chapter, he thanks God, he refers to God, and then later, and then near the end of this chapter, he decides to leave Tier 1 and then completely strips himself from his princely status and his princely stature, instead dressing up like a vagabond, a vagrant. He's dressed up like a common man on the street. There's nothing princely about someone like him, even though, and this is completely juxtaposed by the fact that anytime we've seen this guy, he's luxuriantly dressed. And he's effectively the drip god himself. So he's completely dressed up like a common man and completely stripped himself of his appearance. And of course, there's like a bunch of symbolism to his appearance as well. There's an interesting interpretation that it's like a very voyeuristic ability, where he seems more like a peeping tom. It's an interesting idea, but I don't agree with it. I don't subscribe to the idea completely. I'm more into the idea that, like father, like son, he's also modeled after a terrorist or a domestic terrorist. His father, beyond Netero, was modeled after Shoko Asahara in chapter 401. And of course, he was responsible for the sarin gas attacks. Tserri would also be the Unabomber, based off of him. And of course, the Unabomber was causing all sorts of chaos. And not only has he completely stripped himself of his appearance, and dressed up like a common man, he also completely stripped himself of all earthly materials once and for all, because the only thing he has left in that bag, he's effectively leaving Tier 1. So he's pretty much left all of the Scarlet Eyes and the head of Pyro all the way in his room. And he's completely ditched all of that for the sake of his journey. Man, Tserri's character is so phenomenal. But now I'm going to talk about what happens next in the events of 419 and 420. And I'm going to show this later for the video. So in page 1 of 419, well, first off, I believe that 419 and 420 are all going to be Tserri focused. And they're going to be very Tserri dominant. In page 1, you see what looks like. You can't really tell what it looks like. But if you look at the page where he sketched Tyson, then you can start to form the what that looks like underneath, which is what appears to be Tserri with his sweater, and then the bag over the straps of the bag over his shoulder. And then if you look at this page, this one a lot more clearly from this post, you can start to piece together that this is in fact Tserri. So we immediately start 419 from this subplot, which I'm very happy about. Page 2, looks like a shot of his face mask. Page 3, it looks like another shot of Tserri's sweater and the duffel bag. Maybe him taking out his bag. Page 6, it looks like he's shooting the gun, considering the speed lines on his fingers. So he's already engaging in combat and stealth, and so most likely he's holding the gun or he's firing the gun. So we're about to start seeing action. We're about to see my boy finally leave his nest. His journey is finally beginning. Page 7, it looks like a shot of his hoodie or maybe his hair. page 8, well, you can't really tell what page 8 is, but in page 9, you can see a military boot, and of course, you can see Tserri right there. So it looks like Tserri is confronting military soldiers, and he's going past them. In this shot, I screenshotted from Togashi. He says, I'm struggling with panels that depict multiple people along with their speech bubbles in succession. Now, page 10 and 11, you can't really tell what's going on, but it's more about what Togashi is saying here, because that would fall in line with the kind of ability that Tserri has, with with Togashi having to show him running the future, depicting all of these scenes, the panels and the dialogue, and then Tserri going to the parallel world. Then 13, you can't really see it, but 14, very, very obvious shot of this being Tserri. But this hand right here, it looks like he most likely took out the royal, one of the military, one of the men from the military. Now, of course, if you guys remember, Tserri is now going after Route A, and that is the VVIP recreational facilities. Now, if you guys remember in chapter 405, that's where Hisoka is. And we all believe in chapter 420 that we see Hisoka. Now, I believe in chapter 420 that, 419 is going to be dedicated with us getting complete Tserri focus, and about him sneaking past and going to the VVIP recreational facilities. Now, of course, a chapter is 19 pages, and so we're 14 pages deep, and most likely we're 420 is also another Tserri chapter. So we're essentially getting 3 whole chapters of nothing but my favorite character, which I'm very happy about. And it's very hard to tell, but in page 14, right here, you see the sleeve of Hisoka. But more importantly is page 4, where if you look closely right here, you can see the straps of the back. But that's pretty much it. Don't want to make this too long, so thank you.